The ramekin was still warm in my hands when she said it. "You'll need the calories," Melissa smiled. "You'll be packing soon." I didn't blink, didn't touch the dessert, just sat there, listening to my son laugh like it was a joke, like she hadn't just handed me eviction wrapped in caramelized sugar. This was my house, bought in grief, paid off in sacrifice, and now the woman who married my silence thought she could redecorate me out of it. She thought she served the final course. She didn't know I hadn't even opened the oven. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The china clinked softly as Evelyn set the gravy boat down, its contents still warm but untouched. Across the table, Brian was swirling the last of the mashed potatoes into his roast beef, like he was 10 again, pretending not to notice the frost in the room. Sunday dinner had always been Evelyn's ritual: pot roast, fresh biscuits, a pressed tablecloth, and civility. Lately, only the tablecloth was holding up. Melissa appeared from the kitchen, heels clicking against the tile like warning shots. "Hope you saved room," she said with a too bright smile, balancing a silver tray of ramekins. "I made creme brulee." Janice, seated to Evelyn's right, raised one silver brow. "Fancy." "It's Brian's favorite," Melissa added, leaning over to serve him first. Then she turned to Evelyn, placing the ramekin gently in front of her like an offering. The sugar crust gleamed under the dining room light. "You'll need the calories," she said, her smile holding just a sliver too long. Evelyn paused, spoon in hand. Melissa tilted her head, as if they were sharing a joke no one else understood. "You'll be packing soon, after all." The silence was instant and dense. Brian laughed, not a real laugh, just a fragile burst of noise desperate to be a bridge. "She's joking, Mom. Don't mind her. She's had wine." Melissa didn't deny it. She only turned back to the tray, the faintest smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. Evelyn set her spoon down without touching the dessert. The next moment stretched. No one reaching for the ramekins, no one speaking. Brian cleared his throat and changed the subject to a home renovation podcast he'd started listening to. No one cared. After dinner, the kitchen bustled with the sound of clinking plates and running water, mostly from Evelyn and Janice. Melissa vanished after stacking 2 dishes and sighing loudly enough for it to register as a statement. "She thinks she's clever," Janice muttered, drying a wineglass. "But she serves her insults like appetizers, polished, measured, still poison." Evelyn's hand stayed steady under the warm rinse of the tap, but her eyes held a new, quiet glassiness. "Did you hear what she said?" Janice stopped drying. "Every word." Brian laughed. "Because he's afraid of her. Because he doesn't know how to stand between 2 women without disappearing." She leaned closer, her voice edged with heat. "But that wasn't a joke, Evelyn. That was a warning." Evelyn nodded once. "I know." Outside, the sky was softening to dusk. Streetlights buzzed faintly to life. Evelyn walked Janice to her car, arms folded tight across her cardigan. Janice paused at the driver's side door. "You taught generations of teenagers how to read between the lines. Don't play dumb now." "I'm not," Evelyn said quietly. Janice studied her. "Then you know what comes next." Evelyn looked toward the front window where Melissa's silhouette was already visible through the drapes. Drink in hand, phone pressed to her ear, likely telling someone how exhausting dinner was. "I think," Evelyn said slowly, "it's time I start reading the fine print again." Janice grinned. "There's the principle I know." Evelyn didn't smile back. She stood in the driveway long after Janice had gone, the cicadas humming in the distance, the crickets starting their shift. Her fingers itched for a pen, not to write a list or a grocery note, to strike a name. Inside, Melissa's laugh rang sharp and hollow from down the hall. Evelyn shut the door softly behind her and walked past the untouched ramekin, the caramelized sugar top still perfectly unbroken. Upstairs, in her bedroom, she pulled open the cedar box at the back of her closet. Inside, neatly arranged, was the original copy of her will. She turned on the desk lamp. Her hands didn't shake, and her red pen clicked open. The will had a weight to it, heavier than the pages should allow. Evelyn laid it flat on her desk under the warm lamp glow, the red pen still uncapped beside her coffee mug. Her glasses slipped slightly down the bridge of her nose as she scanned the familiar lines, the careful phrasing she'd approved years ago when everything still felt intact. The house, her life, her son. She traced the language with her fingertip. To my son, Brian Hart, and his wife, Melissa Hart, I leave shared ownership of my estate. There it was. Plain, legal, binding. And so naive it made her stomach turn. She had written that clause when Melissa still smiled without malice, when Brian still called just to say goodnight after checking the locks, when they said we and meant family, not a two-person majority forming behind her back. The house had been hers long before Melissa's nail polish showed up on the bathroom sink. Evelyn had paid the down payment alone after Walter died. She'd refinanced twice to keep the school district from cutting Janice's teaching job. Every inch of molding and grout had her history woven into it. And yet, here Melissa sat on paper. Equal inheritor, equal voice, equal power. On paper, at least. Evelyn lifted the pen. A single red circle bloomed around Melissa's name. Not a slash. Not yet. Just containment. Boundaries. The phone buzzed behind her. Brian. Thanks for dinner. Melissa says sorry if she was sharp. Long day. You know how it is. Evelyn stared at the message, thumb hovering above the screen. Sharp? She imagined a blade pressed lightly to skin. That's what Melissa was. Precision cruelty. She didn't reply. Instead, she opened her laptop and found David Clark's number. The estate attorney's voice hadn't changed in years. Measured, warm, clipped, just short of casual. Evelyn? He said after answering. It's been a while. I need a meeting, as soon as you can. There was a pause. Everything all right? I've decided to make adjustments. Understood, he said without hesitation. Tomorrow morning at 10? Yes. And David. She hesitated. This isn't just housekeeping. I want it structured, in a way that won't be easy to undo. Got it. I'll prepare the trust files. She ended the call, feeling something steady bloom low in her chest. Not rage, not sadness. Resolve. Downstairs, the lights were off in the kitchen except for the blue glow of the refrigerator. Evelyn made her way past the ramekin still sitting on the counter, now filmed over with sugar crusts gone tacky and forgotten. She dropped them one by one into the sink and let the water run, hard and scalding, until steam rose. She let it rise. Janice's voice came through clearly the next morning on speakerphone. She texted you? Janice asked, chewing on something. Let me guess. Sorry if I came off strong. Just a misunderstanding. Close enough. Don't let her pack your bags in your own house, Janice said flatly. She doesn't get to script your exit and then apologize for the font she used. Evelyn smiled, despite herself. I'm seeing David today. Good. Bring that red pen. And wear the blazer that makes you look like you run the State Board of Education. Because, honey, this isn't probate. This is war. Evelyn didn't laugh, but she did button the navy blazer. The file folder was waiting on the passenger seat beside her. Inside, the original will, her pension statement, a spreadsheet of home maintenance costs she'd covered personally over the years. Every sacrifice, every receipt, every stitch of what she'd built without help. The garage door rolled open, sunlight cutting across the windshield like a spotlight. Melissa's car was gone. Good. Evelyn eased down the driveway, her hands calm on the steering wheel, eyes scanning the road like she had a destination far more important than downtown. Because she did. She wasn't just amending a will, she was reclaiming authorship. And by noon, her daughter-in-law's name would be reduced to what it had always deserved to be. A footnote. David Clark's office smelled faintly of lemon oil and old law books. Comfort and power shelved side by side. Evelyn remembered the last time she'd been here. 5 years ago. The will had been routine then, the talk light. That day, David had worn a blue tie and asked about her begonias. Today, the tie was gray. So was his expression. He stood as she entered. "You look well, Evelyn." "I came dressed for war," she replied, settling her bag on the table. Janice's words, not mine. He gave a short smile. "I assume this isn't about a beneficiary update for a new grandchild." "No." She handed him the folder. "It's about an eviction, just not mine." David flipped open the document, scanning quickly. Melissa and Brian still listed as co-heirs, joint ownership of the property, shared access to liquid accounts. His finger stopped. Melissa's name was circled in red. On purpose? Very. He leaned back. "Walk me through it." Evelyn clasped her hands in her lap. "Last night at dinner, Melissa served dessert and told me I'd need the calories because I'd be packing soon." David didn't react. He was used to more dramatic grievances. But Evelyn knew what he was processing. Intent. Not the words, but the intention behind them. "She's been circling for months," Evelyn added. "Little suggestions. Hints that the house could be sold for more if it were staged differently. That I might prefer a place with less to manage. She keeps saying retirement community like it's a spa." David nodded. "And Brian?" "He laughs. Or changes the subject. He won't defend me. He won't oppose her either." David folded his hands. "Do you want Melissa cut out completely?" Evelyn's answer came without pause. "Not just cut. I want her erased." He studied her carefully now. Not doubting. Measuring. He'd represented wealthy families who retracted emotional decisions later, or cracked under pressure during court contests. But Evelyn's tone was surgical. The same calm authority that used to quiet a cafeteria full of sixth graders with one look. "Then we'll establish a conditional trust," he said, opening a drawer and pulling out a fresh legal pad. "Melissa receives nothing. Brian receives a limited disbursement, contingent on performance and conduct. You control the trust until your death, and even then, we can bake in terms so ironclad she'd need a blowtorch and God's approval to contest it." "Perfect. And the house?" "I want her name off any path that leads to it," Evelyn said, her voice tightening. "It's not a starter home. It's a finish line. I crossed it. She doesn't get to." David scribbled rapidly, then paused. "If we move forward with this, Evelyn, it won't stay quiet. Not for long. Melissa will contest. Brian might push back. Are you prepared for that?" Evelyn smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. Let her try. By the time they finished, the conference room table was covered in notes, forms, and draft clauses. Evelyn signed the preliminary documents with unshaking hands. Every signature was a line drawn, not in anger, but in boundary. This far, no further. David gathered the pages carefully. "I'll file the updates by week's end. We'll keep everything airtight. Add Janice as backup executor," Evelyn said as she stood. He arched a brow. "She'll love that." "She already does." Later that afternoon, Janice was waiting for her at the corner booth at Meacham's Cafe, sipping iced tea like it was bourbon. She spotted Evelyn and grinned. "So? Did you go full nuclear?" "Drafts are in motion. Did you use the red pen?" "I used 5, Evelyn said, sliding into the booth. David had to borrow one. Janice leaned in, eyes bright. I hope you left her name off the document so hard it ripped the page. Evelyn lifted her tea. To precision strikes. Janice clinked her glass against Evelyn's and murmured, "May she choke on her own fork." Evelyn didn't laugh, but her smile stretched slowly, deliberately. Her phone buzzed. Brian. Hey, Mom. Got a weird call from Melissa's bank. Can we talk later? Evelyn looked at it, then turned the phone face down. You know what the best part is? She said, eyes still on the condensation dripping down her glass. Janice smirked. Tell me. Evelyn leaned forward just enough to whisper, she doesn't even know the meal's begun. The envelope came on a Thursday. Not from a lawyer, not stamped urgent. Just her regular bank statement, tucked between a coupon flyer and a catalog she hadn't subscribed to in years. Evelyn almost threw it out with the junk mail until she saw the balance. Something was off. She set the kettle on the stove and slid the statement from the envelope with surgeon-like care. The numbers didn't lie, but they didn't belong either. 612-43, Maison Whitman Interiors, $1,087.92, Vintique Home Gallery, $324.11, Dover Luxe Apparel. The names alone told her what she needed to know, places Evelyn had never set foot in. Places Melissa, on the other hand, had gushed about over dinner more than once. She turned the page. 4 more transactions, all under Evelyn's name. All charged to the joint card they'd set up years ago when Brian convinced her to consolidate for simplicity. Her tea kettle hissed, but she didn't move. Instead, Evelyn walked straight to her office, opened her laptop, and logged into her online account. For the next 20 minutes, she cataloged everything: dates, times, locations. She recognized nothing but the bleeding balance. Every purchase came with a digital receipt. And every digital receipt came with a delivery address. Hers. Melissa wasn't just dipping, she was helping herself. David, she said the next morning on speakerphone, I need to bring something by. You sound calm. I'm deciding whether that's an asset or a warning. He chuckled. Bring it. Evelyn arrived with a manila folder thick enough to flap when she dropped it onto David's desk. He opened it slowly, then whistled low. These aren't groceries. She's furnishing my house. With my money. To her taste. And she thinks you won't notice? Evelyn leaned back in her chair. She thinks I've surrendered. David flipped through the receipts, fingers moving quickly. There's enough here to trigger a fraud inquiry. I want to use it, Evelyn said quietly. Not to punish. To position. David looked up. That's leverage, Evelyn. This turns a family spat into a civil case. Or worse. She nodded. Good. That afternoon, Brian showed up unannounced. Evelyn saw his car through the front window and left the door closed until he rang the bell. Twice. When she opened it, he gave a sheepish half-wave. Hey. I was just driving by. You live 22 minutes away. Yeah, well, figured I'd check in. Melissa said you seemed tense lately. Evelyn raised a brow. Did she now? Brian followed her inside, settling awkwardly onto the edge of the armchair like he expected an exam. Listen, about the card stuff. She might have used the wrong one. Honestly, she juggles a lot. Sometimes she forgets which account is which. Evelyn handed him a printed receipt. You're telling me she forgot this? Brian scanned the page. Velvet drapes. Brass wine rack. Decorative glass orb labeled Imported French Artisan Centerpiece. Total, $973.45. He exhaled. Yeah. That's excessive. She billed it to me, every last one, over $3,000 in 30 days. She'll pay it back, he said quickly. I'm sure it wasn't intentional. Evelyn's eyes didn't waver. Brian, she sent that centerpiece to this address. Who do you think it was for? He didn't answer. You're defending her theft in the house I paid off alone. It's not theft, he mumbled. Not really. Evelyn crossed her arms. No, it's worse. It's assumption. She assumed I wouldn't fight back. He looked away. She's not just spending, she's laying claim. Later, Janice dropped by with lemon squares and a grin. You remember that boutique she dragged me into last fall? I touched a lampshade and nearly fainted at the price. Evelyn handed her a receipt. Same place. Janice read it. $1,200 on a mirror? She has to see her own face that badly? She sees herself here. That's the problem. Janice shook her head. She didn't just mix up credit cards, Evelyn. She mixed up nerve with stupidity. Evelyn folded the receipts, neat and square. Let's give her a reason to untangle the two. Her phone dinged. Melissa. FYI, the mirror arrived cracked. Can you call and get it replaced? I'm swamped. Evelyn didn't reply. She walked upstairs, found the mirror propped in the guest room. Bold, gold-framed, absurdly large. She took one long look at her own reflection, then picked up a Sharpie and wrote across the packaging box in clean, slanted letters, "Return to sender." David Clark didn't blink as he hit submit. The fraud complaint window closed with a soft chime, and just like that, Melissa Hart's name officially entered the system, not as Evelyn's daughter-in-law, but as an investigated party in a financial misconduct case. She made it easy, he said, double-checking the filing reference number. Signed delivery slips, a clear spending pattern, and a card she had no authorization to use. She thought having my mailing address was a blank check, Evelyn replied, hands folded neatly in her lap. David adjusted his glasses and glanced over the trust paperwork spread across his desk. And you're ready for the final version? Once we file this with the registrar, it's legally binding. Contesting it would be an uphill battle, especially with this fraud case pending. I want her name gone, permanently. He nodded and reached for the amended document. The new trust was sharper, leaner. Melissa had vanished from the lines like she'd never existed. No inheritance, no shared property, no footnote. Just Brian, listed under conditional terms, and the newly added Literacy Foundation as the primary beneficiary. David turned the document toward her. Initial here, and sign at the bottom. Evelyn took the pen. Each stroke of her name felt surgical. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was reclamation. Of her peace, her future, and the house that bore every memory Melissa had tried to redecorate out of existence. The fallout arrived 2 days later, loud, fast, and wrapped in Brian's voice. He was waiting in her driveway when Evelyn returned from the market, arms full of fresh peaches and cold milk. His car door flung open before she could even step out. You filed a complaint? He barked. Good morning to you too, Evelyn said calmly, unlocking the front door without glancing at him. You reported her? To the bank? To the county? She set the groceries on the counter. She spent $3,000 of my money on velvet and brass. What would you call it? She was decorating the house. My house. He raked a hand through his hair. You didn't have to escalate it this way. We could have talked. I did talk. You changed the subject. She's upset. Evelyn leveled her gaze. I'm sure she is. But not half as upset as she'll be when she finds out she's been removed from my will entirely. Brian's mouth opened, but nothing came out. She what? You heard me? He took a step forward like that might undo it. You're going too far. No, Evelyn said, her voice low and controlled. She did. That evening, Janice brought over apple pie. Not a slice. The whole tin. I figured it was a good day for something flaky and golden, she said, setting it on the counter. Unlike Melissa. Evelyn smiled, the first real one all week. Janice poured 2 cups of tea and settled into her favorite chair. So, what's the fallout? Brian's in denial. Melissa's in the dark, but not for long. Janice bit into her slice. She won't take it quietly. She can scream all she wants. It won't unlock what no longer belongs to her. Janice nodded approvingly. Now the pie's on her face. At precisely 2:44 p.m. the next day, Evelyn's doorbell rang. She didn't have to open it to know who it was. The shrill chime was followed by the unmistakable sound of high heels stomping against the welcome mat. But instead of answering, Evelyn walked to the upstairs window and peeked out. Melissa stood below, holding a cream-colored envelope, her name printed above the return address of Wake County Civil Services. She was reading the notice, lips pressed tight, brow furrowed. Evelyn watched from behind the curtain as her daughter-in-law's smirk dissolved, eyes darting back and forth across the legal notice like it might self-destruct if she blinked. She crumpled the paper in her fist. Then, for the first time in Evelyn's memory, Melissa looked afraid. Not irritated, not inconvenienced. Afraid. Evelyn stepped back from the window. She didn't need to see the tantrum that would follow. She had documents now, and time, and the kind of silence Melissa couldn't manipulate. Her phone vibrated once on the table. Brian. What did you do? She's freaking out. We need to fix this. Evelyn didn't reply. She simply turned off the phone and turned the oven on. Melissa stood in the checkout line at Pembroke and Park, a cashmere cardigan draped over one arm and a candle trio in her basket that smelled like white tea and control. She tapped her credit card against the reader, confident, eyes barely lifting from her phone. Declined. She blinked. Try again, she said to the young cashier, adjusting her sunglasses higher on her head like it might improve reception. The second tap echoed louder. Declined flashed again in red. It's saying. I can read, Melissa snapped, slipping the card back into her wallet with the grace of someone brushing off lint. She pulled out another, the backup she used for incidentals, and tapped. Declined. No red warning this time, just a heavy pause. Melissa forced a smile. It must be something on the bank's end. I'll come back. She left the basket on the counter and walked out without looking back. Her heels clicked too fast against the marble floors. Outside, she yanked out her phone. 5 missed calls from Brian, 1 voicemail from the bank, and an email titled, Urgent Account Activity. Action Required. Meanwhile, Brian was inside First Horizon's flagship branch, sweat collecting at the base of his neck as the teller whispered to a manager across the counter. I just want to know why, Brian repeated, trying to keep his voice down. The checking account says restricted access. What does that mean? It means exactly that, the teller replied, hands folded politely. We've received a formal inquiry into possible misuse of funds connected to this account, so it's under internal review. I'm on the account. She nodded. Yes, sir. But that doesn't override the legal hold. Brian stepped back, stunned. Around him, people filled out deposit slips and waited in line like nothing was unraveling. His phone vibrated again. Melissa. The card's frozen. What the hell is happening? He didn't have an answer, not one that made sense, not one he wanted to say out loud. Back on Sycamore Street, Evelyn sat on the porch, tea steeping beside her, the August air thick with honeysuckle and justice. A book lay open in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in half an hour. She watched the neighbor's dog chase a butterfly across their lawn, listened to a sprinkler sputter to life down the block. Peace, she thought, wasn't the absence of noise. It was the absence of their noise. Her phone buzzed. David Clark. Update. Financial institutions confirmed freeze on all shared hard accounts pending fraud investigation. We should expect pushback soon. Evelyn typed back, let them push. He replied with a single word. Understood. Janice appeared 20 minutes later, holding a brown paper bag and wearing sunglasses that looked too dramatic for daylight. I brought muffins, she said, and something better than muffins. What's better than muffins? Janice pulled out her phone and hit play. A video, clearly taken in secret, filled the screen. Melissa, at the boutique from earlier, voice just barely audible. It's not a big deal. The charges were on Evelyn's account, and I am family. The clerk frowned. But your name's not on the card. I live there, don't I? Melissa snapped. The video cut off just as Melissa realized Janice was behind her. She didn't even flinch, Janice said, handing over the phone. Just turned and walked out when I said hello. Evelyn didn't blink. Did she buy anything? No. Card was declined. Evelyn took a slow sip of tea. Janice bit into a muffin. Every bite's a bitter one now. And I've just started cooking, Evelyn replied softly. They sat in silence for a while, listening to cicadas rise like a wave from the trees. Inside the Hart home, just 5 miles away, Melissa was pacing. Brian stood at the kitchen island, arms crossed, pale and tight-lipped. I told you not to use her card, he said finally. I didn't steal from her, Brian. I was buying things for this house, for us. Did you think she wouldn't notice? Melissa turned on him. No, I thought she wouldn't care. You said she didn't care. You said she was just lonely and bored and wouldn't make a fuss. She's not just making a fuss, Brian muttered. She's making a case. Melissa glared at the fridge like it had betrayed her too. Then we need to make one back. She reached for her laptop. Brian didn't stop her, but he didn't help either. And when Melissa opened a blank document titled Probate Response Draft, her hands hovered over the keys for a long, long time. The front door didn't knock. It slammed. Evelyn barely flinched. She'd been expecting this storm ever since the notice went out. Still, the sound of her front door crashing into the wall echoed like a starter pistol. Melissa came in hot. How dare you? She screeched, heels stabbing the hardwood, face flushed with rage and poorly restrained panic. What the hell do you think you're doing? Evelyn didn't rise from her armchair. She simply tapped the screen of her phone, already recording. Melissa's eyes flicked down to the glowing red circle. Oh, you think you're clever now? What are you going to do with that? Post me online like a viral granny moment? No, Evelyn said, voice calm as linen on a clothesline. This is for my records, in case you forget what you say later. Melissa threw her arms wide, gesturing around the room like she was on stage. You're unbelievable. You think cutting me out of some dusty old trust makes you queen of the hill? You're ungrateful, bitter, and old. Evelyn stood slowly, the phone still steady in her hand. This is my home, she said evenly. Not yours. Not Brian's. And certainly not the woman who tried to steal from me while smiling over creme brulee. Melissa's jaw tightened. I am family. No, you're a guest who overstayed her welcome and started redecorating. Just then, Brian appeared behind her in the doorway, panting slightly like he'd chased her up the walk. Melissa, stop. This isn't helping. She whirled on him. You said you'd talk to her. You said this would blow over. I didn't know she filed a complaint, he said, hands raised in surrender. I didn't know she had evidence. Melissa turned back to Evelyn. You've poisoned him. That's what this is. Some bitter little power trip. No, Evelyn said, crossing the room. This is protection. Something you never gave me the courtesy to consider. She pulled a white envelope from the sideboard and handed it to Melissa. Melissa stared. What is this? Your exit notice. Melissa tore it open, her eyes darting down the page. Her lips moved silently at first, then parted. This is the trust. Amended, Evelyn confirmed. You've been removed. Irrevocably. Brian's access is limited. Everything else goes where it matters. Melissa's hand dropped. You'll regret this. Evelyn tilted her head. Why? Because I chose not to reward your abuse? Brian stepped forward again, panic rising in his voice. Can we please not do this like a courtroom? Evelyn turned to him. Then maybe you should have stopped her before she dragged us all there. Melissa crumpled the trust copy in her fist, voice lower now, but darker. You think a few forms make you safe? Evelyn's voice didn't rise. No, but they make me untouchable. Melissa backed toward the door, face burning. Fine. You want war? You'll get it. Evelyn didn't flinch. You've already lost. Melissa paused at the threshold, shaking her head in disbelief. And for the first time, unsure of the script. She left without slamming the door. Brian lingered a beat longer, eyes wide, mouth working. I didn't ask for this, he said. No, Evelyn replied. You allowed it. Then she turned away and sat back down. The recording still glowed red on her phone. She tapped save. The envelope came by courier this time, thick, crisp, official. Evelyn didn't need to open it to know what it was. She slid it with a letter opener anyway, and unfolded the neatly printed motion. Petition to contest estate trust on grounds of undue influence. Melissa had finally found her battleground. David's office smelled like it always did. Lemon oil and law. But this time, the warmth in his voice was gone. She's arguing that you coerced the trust changes, he said, flipping through the petition with a slow, methodical hand. Claims you've been manipulated, pressured, that you're no longer of sound judgment. Evelyn snorted softly. She's hoping age will work harder than her facts. David tapped the document. She's also requesting temporary reinstatement of account access and a court injunction on any further financial movement. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Ambitious. David smiled grimly. Desperate. He slid a new folder across the desk. Inside, timestamps of purchases, matching receipts, a transcript of Melissa's boutique argument, and the full audio of her tirade in Evelyn's living room. She's going to choke on this, he said. I hope it's the dessert course, Evelyn replied. The hearing date arrived faster than expected. Judge Marla Keene was no one's pushover. A former federal prosecutor turned probate judge with a reputation for sniffing out performative grief like a bloodhound. Her courtroom didn't allow theatrics. Melissa hadn't gotten the memo. I've been like a daughter to her, Melissa told the judge, voice tight with restrained tears. But once her friend got involved and started whispering things, suddenly, I was the villain. Across the aisle, Evelyn sat silently, not blinking, not biting. Brian sat 2 rows behind Melissa, shoulders hunched, hands wringing. Janice was beside Evelyn, crisp blazer, no makeup, eyes narrow and bright like headlights through fog. David stood. Your Honor, I'll be submitting a timeline of financial misconduct, including bank statements, video and audio recordings, and signed delivery slips from merchants showing clear, unauthorized use of my client's funds by the plaintiff. Melissa paled. Additionally, David continued, we have a full psychological evaluation certifying Ms. Hart's mental acuity, signed by her primary physician, and a former neuropsych specialist at UNC Chapel Hill. Judge Keene flipped a page in the file. And you're asking the court to uphold the amended trust in full? Yes, Your Honor. Melissa stood abruptly. She was manipulated by Janice Reed, her little mouthpiece. Judge Keene raised a hand. Sit down, Ms. Hart. This is not a reality show. It's probate court. Melissa sank into her chair. Later that week, Brian appeared on Evelyn's porch again. No anger this time, just exhaustion. I didn't want this, he said, voice low. You didn't stop it either. She's my wife, and I was your mother before she learned to spell your name. He looked away. She's scared, he added. So was I, Evelyn said. The difference is, I didn't use fear as permission to steal. Can't we find a way to settle this? Evelyn's tone didn't soften. You laughed when she threatened me. You chose. He opened his mouth, closed it, then left without another word. That night, Janice brought over creme brulee. From scratch. You've got to be kidding, Evelyn said, eyeing the ramekins. I figured we should reclaim it. It's just custard and sugar. The poison's gone. They sat outside, fireflies blinking around the garden. Janice cracked the sugar top with the back of her spoon. She's flailing, she said. She's always been good at tantrums. Janice took a bite. Let her starve on her own dessert. Evelyn smiled, but inside, her heart beat steady and hard. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was setting precedent. And next week, they'd all be under oath. The envelope had been in Evelyn's desk drawer for weeks, pale yellow, smudged at the corners, sealed with a metal clasp. Inside, a single piece of paper. The delivery confirmation slip from Vintique Home Gallery. She'd almost thrown it away when it arrived, assuming it was routine. But that signature at the bottom, her name, written in a tight, looping scrawl that didn't belong to her hand, had made her pause. She'd never signed for it. Melissa had. Now, standing in David's office, Evelyn slid the slip across his desk. Here, she said. David looked down. This is the mirror delivery? She nodded. She signed it. As me. David's eyes narrowed. We can have it analyzed. I already did. From her bag, she pulled a slim folder stamped with the logo of a private forensic document examiner. She flipped it open to the final page. Bold, unambiguous. Conclusion. Signature is inconsistent with provided exemplars. Likely forged. David read it twice, then looked up at her. You're about to bury her. Evelyn's voice didn't waver. She thought I'd fold. I don't. Court reconvened 2 days later. The room was cool, sterile. No dramatic lighting, no camera angles. Just truth. Fluorescent and inescapable. David stood with practiced calm. Your Honor, we request to enter into evidence this delivery confirmation slip from a $1,200 mirror purchase delivered to Ms. Hart's home. The signature on this document, purporting to be Ms. Evelyn Hart's, has been analyzed by a certified forensic examiner. He handed Judge Keene the file. Results confirm the signature was forged. Melissa shifted sharply in her seat, her heels scraping against the floor. Across the aisle, Evelyn sat still as a stone. Judge Keene flipped through the report slowly. And who signed for this item? David didn't need to answer. Melissa shot to her feet. This is ridiculous. I was there when it came, I was just helping. The delivery guy said it was fine. Keene raised a brow. So you admit to signing someone else's name? No, I mean, I didn't intend. David stepped forward. Intent is irrelevant. Forgery is forgery. Melissa looked to Brian, desperate. Say something. But Brian was staring down at the table, jaw locked, hands clenched. Mr. Hart, the judge prompted. Do you have anything to add? He shook his head. No, Your Honor. Melissa's voice cracked. You're really going to let this happen? He didn't answer. Keene turned back to Evelyn. Ms. Hart, do you wish to respond? Evelyn stood slowly, her posture straight despite the tremor that had begun in her left hand. My hands may tremble, she said, her voice steady, eyes locked on Melissa, but not on the truth. The room was silent. Even the court clerk had stopped typing. Judge Keene nodded once. This will be considered as character evidence. The court will take this matter under advisement in our final ruling. Melissa slumped back in her seat like the air had been knocked out of her. After court, Evelyn stepped outside into the crisp fall air. The sky had changed. No longer summer's haze, but the clear, sharp blue of early October. The courthouse steps felt steeper today. But she took each one with care. Janice waited at the bottom, arms crossed, lips pursed. Did she really try to argue she was helping by faking your name? She did. Janice shook her head. Unbelievable. No, Evelyn said. It's entirely believable. That's what makes it dangerous. David caught up to them, briefcase in hand. That forgery just tipped the scales, he said. She's done. People like her, Evelyn replied. Never believe they're finished until someone locks the door. As if on cue, Evelyn's phone buzzed. A new email from David's assistant. Subject, final hearing. Date set. She opened it and read the date. 2 weeks from today. The verdict would be public, permanent. Everything Evelyn had built, her legacy, her safety, her dignity, would be tested in that courtroom. But Melissa would finally be forced to sit, silent, while someone else rewrote the ending. And Evelyn would have the pen. The courtroom was quieter than usual, not still, just tight. As if the air had contracted around them. Melissa sat at the plaintiff's table, chin lifted, hair pulled back too tight, blouse pristine. But her foundation couldn't hide the shine of panic. Evelyn didn't look at her. She hadn't for most of the hearing. Today wasn't about watching Melissa. It was about showing her. David stood, files stacked high beside him like an arsenal. He adjusted his cuffs and approached the bench with precision. Your Honor, he said, his voice low but unflinching. We now submit our full exhibit packet detailing financial exploitation against Ms. Hart by the plaintiff. Judge Keene nodded once. Proceed. David gestured to the projector. We begin with bank records. Here, Your Honor, you'll see a series of high-value purchases billed to Ms. Hart's account, without her knowledge or consent, totaling over $3,400. On screen, transaction after transaction appeared. Boutique decor, high-end clothing, and spa services. Each one tied to Melissa's favorite spots, not Evelyn's lifestyle. David continued. Next, recorded audio. March 3rd, Ms. Hart captured the plaintiff entering her home uninvited, berating her over the amended trust. The court played 30 seconds of Melissa's voice. You're bitter and old. No one even wants your damn house. Melissa flinched at the sound of her own voice in the echo of the courtroom. She glanced sideways. Even Brian didn't look at her. David cleared his throat. Lastly, the signed delivery receipt from Vintique Home Gallery. Forged. Confirmed by a third-party handwriting expert. He closed the folder. Together, these aren't isolated mistakes. They paint a clear pattern of entitlement, deception, and coercion. He turned back to the judge. We move for full upholding of the amended trust, plus restitution of all fraudulent charges. Melissa rose abruptly. This is being twisted. These were misunderstandings. I was managing things for Evelyn. She said I could redecorate. She never said no. Ms. Hart, Judge Keene said firmly, did she ever give you written consent to access her finances? No, Melissa admitted, voice tight. Did she sign a joint account agreement with you? No, she said again, smaller. The judge nodded once. Then this court doesn't recognize assumptions as currency. Melissa sat down hard. Brian looked straight ahead, hands clenched between his knees. He spoke softly. We never meant harm. Evelyn finally looked at him. Not cruel, but direct. Silence is harm, Brian. You watched her do it. And you watched me go quiet. His mouth opened, but no words came. Across the room, Judge Keene stacked the evidence, spine straight, eyes unreadable. This court will return in 30 minutes with its ruling, she said. Until then, this hearing is adjourned. Her gavel fell with a dull thud, and every piece of paper in the room suddenly felt heavier. In the hallway outside, Melissa slumped on the bench beside Brian, eyes wild. You're just going to let this happen? That smug old woman is getting away with... Brian stood up. She's not the one caught lying, he said. Melissa blinked. You believe her now? I believed her then. I just didn't have the guts to say it. She scoffed. You're weak. No, he said. I'm tired. He walked down the hall and didn't look back. Inside a quiet side room, Evelyn sat with Janice and David, a small carafe of lukewarm coffee between them. No one poured. You think the judge will rule our way? Janice asked. David checked his watch. It's not a matter of if, just how far she goes. Evelyn stared out the window, where the courthouse lawn buzzed with muted motion, attorneys pacing, pigeons pecking, justice circling like a hawk. She reached into her purse, pulled out a pen, and clicked it softly. Not to write. Just to remember that this time she hadn't been erased. She'd documented every word. And when the judge returned, so would the verdict that Melissa couldn't wiggle out of. The courtroom doors swung open with less force than before. No theatrics now, just gravity. Judge Marla Keene took her seat with the same straight spine and steady expression she'd worn through every hour of testimony, but something in her eyes had sharpened, like her patience had reached its final filing point. Evelyn sat still. Janice was beside her again, not touching her, not speaking, just present. David reviewed one last page, his pen clicking twice before falling silent. Across the aisle, Melissa looked pale beneath her makeup. Brian had a legal pad in his lap but hadn't written a word on it. He stared at it like it might hold a better version of the day. Judge Keene looked out over the room. This court has reviewed the evidence, exhibits, and sworn testimony. We now rule on the validity and structure of Ms. Evelyn Hart's amended estate trust. The clerk flipped open a document. Keene began reading. Assets in question include one fully owned residential property at 82 Sycamore Street, Raleigh, North Carolina, liquid savings totaling $384,200, a Roth IRA in excess of $215,000, and a collection of heirlooms and antiques assessed at $91,000. Melissa's mouth parted slightly, but she caught herself, sat taller. Keene continued. All changes made to the estate have been found legally valid, free of coercion or diminished capacity. The court recognizes the amended trust in full. David exhaled. Keene didn't stop. As per the amended document, the plaintiff, Melissa Hart, is to be excluded from the estate entirely. Named specifically and deliberately. Quote, intentionally and with purpose. Melissa made a sound, something between a gasp and a wheeze. Keene paused only briefly. Brian Hart is to be included as a restricted beneficiary, receiving disbursements solely from a conditional trust, contingent upon guidelines outlined by the trust administrator. Brian bowed his head slightly, not in agreement, but resignation. Keene closed the file. The remaining estate, by majority, is to be designated to the Evelyn J. Hart Literacy Fund and Scholarship Foundation, an endowment to provide legal and educational resources for elderly citizens facing coercion and displacement. A small, reverent silence passed through the room like a shiver. Janice Reed, Keene said, eyes lifting to the second row, is hereby appointed executor with full fiduciary oversight, including discretionary power over the trust's enforcement. Melissa's voice broke through the hush. You can't be serious. Keene turned to her without missing a beat. Sit down, Ms. Hart. But Melissa didn't sit. She swayed slightly, knees softening, color draining. Then she folded forward and hit the carpet with a sound that was far too soft for a collapse that big. Gasps broke out. Brian lunged. Evelyn remained seated. The bailiff called for medical assistance, but the judge simply folded her hands and said, We'll recess briefly. Melissa was back on her feet 10 minutes later, glassy-eyed and shaken, an ice pack pressed to her temple. She refused the EMT's ride. Brian hovered but didn't speak. The courtroom had changed in those 10 minutes, not legally, just atmospherically. The Hart name, once spoken with pride, now hung in the air like smog. Outside the courthouse. Evelyn walked slowly down the steps, David's hand lightly supporting her elbow. The reporters were there now. Not many, but enough. Word had spread about the unusual trust, the elder fraud claim, the forgery. A local journalist called out, "Ms. Hart, do you have anything to say to those who think you went too far?" Evelyn paused. She adjusted her collar, looked directly at the reporter, and said, "There's no such thing as too far when you're walking back to your own front door." Behind her, Janice smiled like a woman who'd waited decades for that line to be said. In the distance, Melissa sat in Brian's car, passenger seat reclined, sunglasses on despite the clouds. As Evelyn turned the corner, Melissa watched her go. Jaw clenched, nails digging into the armrest, still not understanding that this wasn't about punishment. It was about permanence. The headline ran above the fold in the Raleigh Chronicle the next morning. Retired principal. Rewrites the rules. Judge upholds will amid elder exploitation case. The photo showed Evelyn stepping down the courthouse steps, back straight, one hand resting gently on David Clark's arm. Janice was 2 paces behind her, looking directly into the camera like she'd been waiting years to be asked for comment. Inside, the article unfolded Evelyn's story like a fable with teeth. A respected educator, a betrayal from within the family, a courtroom battle that spotlighted not just fraud, but resilience. By noon, 3 local TV stations had picked it up. By nightfall, it was trending on a subreddit about elder rights, where users called Evelyn an icon, a class act, and repeatedly, the anti-Karen. Melissa's name didn't trend, but her face did. A clip from the courtroom. The moment she shouted, "You can't be serious," just before fainting, made the rounds on TikTok. The caption beneath most reposts read, "When the inheritance doesn't come with entitlement." She deleted her social media accounts 2 days later. Brian posted a neutral statement on Facebook. "I respect the court's decision and my mother's wishes. Please refrain from messaging us about the outcome. We are focusing on healing privately. No mention of Melissa. No photo of them together. Just silence, with a digital signature." Janice texted Evelyn a screenshot and added, "He finally figured out how to speak without her hand up his back." Letters began showing up on Evelyn's doorstep. From neighbors she hadn't spoken to in years. From former students. From strangers. One came from a woman 3 blocks over. "I've been afraid to stand up to my own daughter-in-law. You gave me language. Thank you." Another arrived from a man whose father had lost his house after a financial abuse case was buried under family misunderstanding. It ended with, "You did what the rest of us thought we had to survive, instead of fix." Evelyn saved every one. She placed them in a cedar box beneath her reading chair, the same chair where she once circled Melissa's name in red. Now, that box held evidence of a different kind. Not proof of fraud, but proof of fight. "Coffee cake," Janice said, setting it down with a grin. "From Nancy on Elm Street. She said she's too shy to come by, but she wanted you to have something sweet without any bitterness baked in." Evelyn smiled as she cut a slice. "That's a new flavor." She also said if you ever feel like giving a talk at the garden club, they'll triple your speaker fee. "I don't garden." Janice raised a brow. "Doesn't matter. You've been upgraded. You're not a gardener anymore. You're a legend." Evelyn laughed softly, the kind of laugh that came from deep in the lungs and light in the ribs. They sat at the table, 2 mugs steaming between them, crumbs softening the silence. Janice leaned back. "You did it." "I documented it," Evelyn corrected. "And I survived it." Janice reached for another slice. "Well, to survival and slow-roasted justice." Evelyn lifted her fork. "Dignity," she said. "Tastes better than dessert." Melissa scrolled through her phone in silence. Brian had gone to stay with a friend for the week. He said he needed space to think. He left behind his laptop, toothbrush, and his silence, which was growing louder by the day. The only texts Melissa received now were from numbers she didn't recognize, or old coworkers pretending to check in just to find out if the rumors were true. The internet had made her famous in the worst way. Without sympathy, without control. One message read simply, "Saw the video. You got what you deserved." She deleted it, then stared at the screen for a long time. When she finally turned it off, the reflection staring back at her in the dark screen didn't look angry. It looked irrelevant. The room wasn't grand, just a converted church hall with folding chairs, weak coffee, and a makeshift podium borrowed from the Parks and Rec office. But every seat was filled. Evelyn adjusted her scarf as she waited at the side entrance. She'd expected maybe a dozen people. Instead, the event flyer had made its way into libraries, clinics, Facebook groups. Protecting Dignity, Elder Rights in Action, sponsored by the Raleigh Senior Alliance, featuring Evelyn Hart. When the moderator introduced her, the applause was polite. By the time she reached the podium, it had grown into something louder. Not ovation exactly, but insistence. The kind of applause that said, "We heard what you did, and we need it to mean something." Evelyn adjusted the mic. It squealed once, then went quiet. She began. "I was a school principal for 31 years. I've done fire drills in heels and once diffused a parent fight in the cafeteria using only a plastic spoon and the threat of a suspension letter." Laughter rippled gently, but nothing prepared me for what happens when the betrayal doesn't come from students, or parents, or strangers, when it comes from inside your own family. The room stilled. She let it breathe. "My daughter-in-law spent thousands in my name. She mocked my age, tried to rewrite my legacy while I was still living in it. And my son, well, he watched." No gasps, just nods, because every face in that room knew a version of her story. My case got headlines, not because it was rare, but because I refused to let it stay private. She lifted a single sheet of paper from the podium. "Today, I'm proud to announce that the Evelyn J. Hart Literacy Fund will be donating $50,000 to launch 3 legal clinics across Wake County. These will be free, confidential, and specifically for seniors facing financial abuse and coercion." Applause rose like a wave, not thunderous, but determined. The kind of sound built from grit, not gratitude. In the front row, Janice blinked fast behind her glasses. Evelyn looked out over the crowd. "My story isn't rare," she said again, slower now. "But silence makes it worse." And that's when she saw it. An empty chair in the back row. Reserved, unclaimed. A folded card rested on it. Melissa Hart. No one sat there. No one ever would again. After the talk, people lined up with handshakes, stories, tissues. Some just pressed her hand and moved on. One woman whispered, "My nephew forged a deed under my name. I thought I was imagining it." Another, "I didn't think anyone would believe me, not even my kids." Evelyn didn't offer advice, just her presence. Sometimes, that was enough. Out in the parking lot, Janice pulled a coffee cake from the passenger seat. "This one's from someone named Sharon who says she hated you in high school, but is now your biggest fan." Evelyn laughed softly, resting her hand on the roof of the car. "Think Melissa saw any of the coverage?" Janice shrugged. "She's not showing up in anyone's group chats anymore. And you know how brutal bunco night can be when your name gets passed around in a prayer circle." "She won't recover socially," Evelyn said. Janice tilted her head. "Do you care?" Evelyn thought for a long moment. "No. But I remember what it feels like, to sit in a room and know everyone's made up their mind." Janice nodded once. "Yeah. But this time, they made it right." They drove in silence for a while. Fall had begun to show at the edges, yellow creeping into the maple trees, a sharper bite to the breeze. At a red light, Janice reached over and gently squeezed Evelyn's hand. "You ended this your way." Evelyn didn't speak. She just held on, and didn't let go. The porch had always been quiet, but now, Evelyn realized, the silence was finally hers. She sat with one leg tucked beneath the other, shawl around her shoulders, a mug of honeyed tea warming her palms. The wind was light, and somewhere in the neighbor's yard, a wind chime tickled the air with sound too soft to interrupt thought. The mornings used to feel heavy, packed with tension, or waiting, or noise that wasn't sound at all. But now, they stretched, unhurried, unapologetic. She unfolded the latest envelope from the Evelyn J. Hart Literacy Fund. Inside was a letter, handwritten in purple ink on lined notebook paper. "Dear Ms. Hart, I'm the daughter of a housekeeper and a man who left. I never thought I'd go to college. Your scholarship paid for my first semester's books. I got an A in legal writing. Someday I'll argue a case for someone like you. Love." Marisol R. Evelyn smiled, not the kind meant for company, the kind that slipped out when something found its rightful place. She laid the letter on the small table beside her. Under it sat 5 more, all from students. All different versions of what it meant to escape something quietly trying to own you. Janice's voice floated from the walkway. "Got 2-for-1 pears and a rogue bag of almonds. Don't ask me how I bartered for it. Let's just say I charmed the bag boy and confused the cashier." Evelyn chuckled as Janice climbed the steps, reusable tote over one arm, wearing a scarf she'd obviously stolen from Evelyn's hall closet weeks ago. "You're late," Evelyn said, without looking up. "I'm not late," Janice replied, setting the bag down. "You just started mornings earlier ever since you got your name back." Evelyn reached into the tote. "Is this a tin of those orange shortbreads?" They were next to the pears. I felt judged. They settled into their usual chairs, the ones they hadn't named but always claimed. Janice pulled out a thermos, poured them each a little something stronger than tea. "Anything from Brian?" she asked softly. Evelyn shook her head. "Not since the Foundation press release. He sent a donation. Quietly." "Huh. That's how he's always done things?" Loud when she was near, silent when he finally heard me. Janice looked out across the yard. The garden Evelyn once worried she might not live in much longer was beginning to bloom again. Tiny green shoots, early daffodils, new roots in old soil. "Melissa?" Janice asked. She moved across town, not far, but far enough to make it seem like she left on purpose. No one's fooled. She spends her days arguing with bank managers and realtors who won't return her calls. Janice took a long sip. Bitter is expensive. Evelyn didn't gloat. She simply reached for the letter from Marisol and read it again. "She once told me I was boxed in by the past," Evelyn murmured. "Like being rooted meant being buried." "And now?" Evelyn ran her fingers along the edge of the envelope. "Now I think they packed me in their words. I unpacked my freedom." Janice didn't speak right away. Then she leaned over, placed her hand gently on Evelyn's. "You didn't just unpack it," she said. "You built a damn front porch with a view." They sat that way for a long time. 2 women who'd buried the versions of themselves others tried to write, now sitting in the version they chose. The sun climbed higher. In the garden, a crocus opened wide. Evelyn reached for her tea, paused, and smiled at the horizon. Because for the first time in a very long time, nothing, and no one, was trying to rewrite her morning. And she wasn't waiting for the quiet to end. She was keeping it. The notary arrived on a Tuesday. She was young. Couldn't have been more than 27, but her handshake was firm. Her presence quiet. Evelyn liked that. She didn't want a spectacle, just finality. They sat in the sunroom, papers laid out in precise stacks. The new revisions to the estate weren't complex, just intentional. "Do you need me to read each line aloud?" the notary asked. Evelyn smiled gently. "No. I wrote them." She signed each page with the same pen she'd used for the amended trust. The one Janice had insisted was too heavy. Like a judge's gavel had a baby with a fountain pen. Every signature left a mark like a decision. Not a whisper. Not a trace. Ink you couldn't erase. The Evelyn J. Hart Literacy Fund had grown. Not wildly, not to the tune of headlines, but enough to fund 2 new rural reading clinics and expand the scholarship program. 5 students were already in their second semester. 2 planned to become lawyers. 1, a librarian. Another letter had arrived just that morning. "Dear Ms. Hart, we read your case in class. My professor called it a landmark. But to me, it was just proof that you don't have to be loud to be strong. I hope I make you proud." Kay Evelyn had cried just a little and then tucked it away with the others. That afternoon, Noah stopped by. He didn't say much, never did, but he handed her a sketch he'd drawn. The porch, 2 chairs, and a woman holding a letter in her lap. "I thought maybe you'd want to frame it," he mumbled. She hugged him, not because it was expected, but because she could. Inside a small jewelry box, she handed him the compass Brian had once brought home from a school field trip. "Your father never used it," she said, "but I hope you will." Noah looked confused. "It's his?" "It was," she said. "Now it's yours, to find your own way, not someone else's map." He nodded, carefully, and when he left, he held the box like it mattered. By early evening, the house was warm with smells that hadn't lived there in a while. Rosemary, lemon, garlic melting into bread. Janice arrived first, carrying a bottle of red and a pie that didn't match the meal. "It's tradition," she shrugged. Nancy followed, with her cardigan buttoned wrong and a story about misreading the dinner time. A couple from the neighborhood brought a folding chair just in case. You never know how long the stories get when the wine kicks in. They ate at Evelyn's dining table, the one Melissa once tried to cover with glass. Tonight, it was bare wood and linen napkins, wine rings left carelessly, laughter left freely. No one said Melissa's name. No one had to. Evelyn raised her glass at dessert. "This table," she said, glancing around, "is mine again." And the applause that followed wasn't loud, just honest. Later, when the dishes were done and the lights dimmed, Evelyn walked through her home in her slippers, stopping in each room. Not because she was saying goodbye, just because she could. She ran her hand along the window frame in the guest room, where the mirror used to be. She opened the hall closet and touched the edge of the scarf Janice never officially gave back. She passed the sideboard where her will now sat. In a labeled envelope, witnessed and notarized. Inside it, a detailed ledger for the scholarship fund, letters for each recipient, a list of heirlooms and their stories. Her final words, handwritten: "Melissa Hart is to receive nothing from my estate, intentionally and with purpose, because silence is not consent, and cruelty is not inheritance." And beneath that, one final note: "To Janice, executor of this home, this peace, this last laugh." She turned out the lights, one by one. The house didn't creak the way it used to. It breathed. She poured one last splash of wine, returned to her reading chair, and picked up her pen. No papers to sign now. Just thoughts to hold. And then, with no audience, no fanfare, Evelyn Hart smiled at the quiet. "My daughter-in-law offered me dessert," she said aloud softly, then said, "You'll need the calories. You'll be packing soon." She lifted her glass. "So I packed her name out of my will instead."